The first sign was subtle, a low, tremulous groan that rose from the far corner of the enclosure. The lioness, her tawny coat dull and clumped with dust, lay unusually still, her eyes half closed, ears twitching at every distant sound. The vet approached slowly, the weight of concern pressing down on each careful step. "Easy, easy, girl," he whispered, kneeling a short distance away, hands steady but gentle. She lifted her head briefly, nostrils flaring, before settling again. Her breathing was uneven, shallow, almost hesitant. Months of careful observation had prepared the shelter staff for this day, yet nothing could have prepared them for the unease that rippled through the enclosure now. The sun slanted through the tall fence bars, casting long, striped shadows across her body. Dust motes drifted in the warm shafts of light, catching in the whiskers of her muzzle as she let out a slow moan, then another. The smell of hay, sweat, and the faint iron tang of the shelter filled the air. Every muscle in her frame tensed as if recalling some deep memory of the wild. The first cub appeared suddenly, slick and trembling, sliding from her side with a quiet squelch. Relief washed over the humans like a soft tide, but the lioness did not relax. She sniffed at the newborn with a careful deliberation, her large eyes searching, calculating. A second cub followed, still small, still fragile, curling instinctively toward her warmth. Then the vet's hand paused midair. Something was off. The shape moving behind the second cub did not resemble the delicate frame of a newborn lion. It was too small, too oddly formed, its features twisting in a way that startled even the most experienced eyes. He swallowed hard, bending closer. The lioness, sensing no immediate threat, nudged the unusual infant with a cautious nudge. Her large golden eyes widened slightly, a mixture of recognition and confusion. The creature responded with a feeble whimper, tiny limbs flailing. The staff exchanged nervous glances, uncertainty hanging thickly over them. Yet there was no panic, only an attentive stillness. They watched, breath held, as the lioness delicately licked the small form, her tongue surprisingly precise, her touch reverent. Nature, stubborn and mysterious, had delivered something unexpected. The tiny life, fragile and imperfect, began to settle under her vigilant care. The lioness's chest rose and fell steadily, the rhythm of survival and maternal instinct guiding every movement. Outside, the wind stirred the sparse trees along the enclosure, carrying the scent of grass and distant earth. A bird called somewhere high above, sharp and sudden. The cubs whimpered softly, and she answered with a deep, rumbling purr, a sound that wrapped around the humans with a quiet assurance. Life endures, even when it surprises. By evening, the light had softened into a honeyed glow, painting the enclosure in muted golds and amber. The lioness lay curled around her three charges, guarding them as if the world outside could wait. The humans stepped back slowly, hearts lifted and humbled, knowing that this moment, unexpected, delicate, miraculous, would linger forever in memory. She lifted her head once more, glanced toward them, then returned to her vigil. Outside the bars, shadows stretched long across the ground. The air was still, save for the soft breaths of a family learning, slowly, to begin again. The lioness rested against the far wall of the enclosure, her body stretched along the rough concrete floor. The three cubs nestled close, their tiny forms pressed against her flanks, warm and trembling. She lifted her head intermittently, ears swiveling at the slightest noise. A crow overhead, the soft footfalls of the shelter staff, the rustle of dried leaves outside. Her eyes were sharp, alert, yet measured. Every movement carried the weight of caution, a reminder that the world outside her enclosure had not always been kind. The vet knelt at a careful distance, clipboard forgotten, hands empty but ready. Each morning brought a ritual of quiet observation, soft offerings of food placed just far enough to allow her choice, her control. The air was thick with the scent of straw, hay, and the faint tang of antiseptic from the previous day's checks. Sunlight spilled through the mesh, warming her tawny coat, catching the delicate sheen of sweat along her shoulders. Even in her wariness, there was a subtle grace in the way she stretched, flexed her limbs, and guided her cubs with gentle nudges. The tiny abnormal cub stirred, tiny limbs struggling for purchase. The lioness's eyes softened, a low, rumbling purr vibrating in her chest. She nudged him closer, her tongue tracing careful paths along the small, imperfect form. For the humans watching, it was a quiet revelation. Trust and maternal instinct could coexist even with uncertainty. "Good girl, you're doing just fine," the vet murmured, voice soft, barely above a whisper. Days passed in a rhythm that was both deliberate and fragile. The cubs grew steadily, wobbling on unsteady legs, chasing stray insects, and tumbling over each other. The lioness followed each motion, correcting with a precise nudge or a gentle growl when boundaries were tested. The unusual cub, so tiny and vulnerable, became the quiet center of attention. Each success, each small triumph, was met with a watchful, measured approval from its mother. Outside, the landscape shifted with the seasons. A breeze carried the scent of wet earth and distant flowers. Birds chirped and swooped through the treetops, and the shelter echoed with muted calls from other animals, distant yet comforting. The lioness's body relaxed in these rhythms, a cautious acknowledgement that danger was no longer immediate. Trust, however, was a careful negotiation. She would approach only when certain of safety, retreating at the faintest hint of intrusion. Staff learned patience, adapting their movements, their voices, their presence to her unspoken rules. Each day, a step closer, each day, a lesson in respect, observation, and the subtle language of empathy. By evening, the enclosure glowed with amber light. The lioness lay in a half-circle, her cubs pressed against her, and for a few moments, time seemed to pause. The human stepped back, feeling the quiet weight of connection. No dramatic gestures, no forced interaction, only the steady, unspoken acknowledgement that trust had begun to take root. She lifted her head briefly, ears flicking at a far-off sound, then returned to her vigil. In the fading light, 3 small shadows pressed against her flanks, and the world outside the enclosure seemed, for a heartbeat, gentle and forgiving. A faint, irregular sound disturbed the morning stillness, a soft, wheezing cough from the smallest cub. The lioness's head snapped up, eyes scanning her surroundings with sharpened awareness. She nudged the tiny form, pressing it close to her chest, her body tense, every muscle coiled in concern. The staff noticed immediately. The unusual cub, already fragile from birth, trembled slightly under the lioness's careful protection. Its tiny chest rose and fell unevenly, each breath shallow, punctuated by quiet, whimpering gasps. The vet approached slowly, crouched low, sensing the lioness's sharp gaze. "She's noticed something," he whispered. "We'll be careful." Sunlight filtered through the fence, highlighting the lioness's glistening coat and the delicate sheen of sweat along her shoulders. The enclosure carried the mixed scents of hay, earth, and faint antiseptic from recent checks. Dust rose gently with each movement, sparkling in the golden light. The cub's fragile struggle drew the mother closer, her massive head curling protectively around it. A low, rumbling purr vibrated in her chest, filled with tension and urgency. She shifted, nudging the cub with gentle insistence, then stepping back just far enough to allow the vet to observe without alarming her. Time slowed. Each second was drawn taut with worry and watchfulness. The lioness's golden eyes followed every movement, ears flicking at the faintest sound. A crow overhead, leaves rustling against the fence, a distant bark. Her vigilance was relentless, instinct guiding every motion. The vet knelt, observing the cub's labored breathing. "We need to check him," he murmured, keeping his voice low, soothing. The lioness's gaze never left them, sharp and assessing. A subtle nod of understanding passed between human and animal, a quiet acknowledgement that this was necessary, but only with care. A few gentle movements, soft encouragements, and the cub was examined. Its tiny body quivered, but the mother never left her post, pressing her bulk close to the other 2 cubs, eyes alert. Every lick, every nudge, was a small reassurance, a promise of protection. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying scents of wet soil and distant grass. Birds called in the tall trees, and the sun rose higher, bathing the enclosure in warm light. The cub's breathing stabilized slightly, a tentative improvement that allowed the lioness a brief, measured relaxation. She lay down fully this time, her head resting near her tiny charge, her eyes half closed but watchful. By late afternoon, the tension eased into cautious relief. The human stepped back, observing from a respectful distance as the lioness resumed her careful grooming of the cubs. The unusual one nestled between her paws, tiny breaths evened out, and the mother's tail flicked in quiet contentment. The enclosure fell into a gentle rhythm, punctuated by the soft sounds of the cubs exploring, the low hum of the lioness's purrs, and the distant calls of other animals. A fragile trust, tested and affirmed, lingered in the warm air. The humans left slowly, knowing the moment was private, sacred, and fleeting. The lioness lifted her head one final time, glancing toward the shelter fence, then returned to her vigilant watch. 3 small bodies huddled against her, their tiny forms a testament to resilience, instinct, and the delicate balance between human care and wild nature. Outside, the sun began its slow descent, casting a soft, amber glow over the scene, as though sealing the day with quiet hope. The morning had begun quietly, sun spilling through the sparse trees, the cubs tumbling clumsily after one another, tails flicking, tiny roars spilling into the still air. The lioness watched closely, ears swiveling, body coiled in readiness. A sudden change in the wind brought the first scent of rain, sharp and earthy. Clouds rolled quickly overhead, dark and heavy, muting the warm sunlight. The lioness stiffened, her ears pinned back, tail flicking nervously. The cubs hesitated mid-play, their tiny forms huddling close to her legs. The vet noticed the shift instantly. "She senses it," he murmured, moving quietly, hands empty. The lioness's muscles tensed, eyes sharp and vigilant. The first drops fell, heavy and cold, striking the enclosure with a rhythmic patter. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and threatening. The cubs whimpered softly, shivering beneath her coat. She nudged them closer, pressing her massive frame against their fragile bodies, each movement deliberate and protective. The wind bent the trees, whipping dust and leaves across the enclosure, but she held her ground, refusing to retreat. The rain intensified, drumming against the metal fencing and pooling in shallow puddles. Staff moved carefully, placing extra hay near the enclosure's sheltered corners, speaking in low, calm tones. "It's all right, we're here," whispered the vet. The lioness's gaze never wavered, assessing, calculating, ensuring her cubs remained safe. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating her tawny coat and the glistening forms of the cubs. Her chest rose and fell in deep, controlled breaths, a low growl vibrating in her throat. Even as the storm raged, she remained a pillar of focus, every action precise and protective. The smallest cub slipped slightly in the slick mud, and instinctively she adjusted, curling around it, shielding it with her bulk. The other two scrambled against her sides, finding warmth and security in the rhythmic press of her body. For a moment, all other concerns vanished. The storm, the humans, the wider world, leaving only the immediate bond between mother and young. The humans observed quietly, respecting her authority and restraint. No sudden movements, no forced actions, only careful support, a shared acknowledgement that nature demanded patience and respect. She accepted their presence with a subtle nod of understanding, her eyes flicking briefly in recognition, before returning to her vigilance. By late afternoon, the storm eased, leaving the enclosure wet but calm. Puddles reflected the soft light of the sun breaking through the clouds. The lioness stretched, her coat damp but sleek, and nudged her cubs forward to explore again. Their small bodies shivered and stumbled, but she remained close, tail flicking gently in reassurance. The human stepped back completely, giving her space. The moment was quiet, filled with the soft sounds of dripping water, distant bird calls, and the low purrs of contentment from a mother and her cubs. Survival, trust, and instinct had merged seamlessly in a single, unspoken lesson. As the last light of the stormed day touched the enclosure, the lioness lay in a half-circle around her cubs, their tiny forms nestled against her. The humans lingered at the fence, carrying the memory silently with them, a day of challenge, of fear, and of unwavering maternal courage, sealed in the soft amber glow of a post-storm sky. The morning air carried a soft warmth, tinged with the scent of dew and distant grass. The lioness lay stretched across the sunlit patch of the enclosure, the cubs nestled against her, tiny bodies rising and falling with steady breaths. Their legs had grown stronger, their roars bolder, their curiosity insistent. A rustle in the far corner caught the cubs' attention. They scrambled forward, hesitant at first, tails twitching. The lioness lifted her head, muscles coiled, but her eyes softened, a silent permission to explore. Slowly, the cubs moved into the open, sniffing, pawing at the damp earth, testing balance and boundaries. The humans lingered quietly, barely a presence, letting the natural rhythm unfold. "Go on," whispered the vet softly, more to himself than to anyone else. The lioness's gaze flicked briefly in acknowledgement but remained fixed on her cubs, attentive yet allowing space. The smallest cub, still fragile from birth, wobbled forward with unsteady steps. A tiny sneeze echoed in the enclosure, and the mother's head twitched in response, a subtle reassurance in the form of a low rumble. She nudged the cub gently, guiding, correcting, encouraging, but never imposing. Each touch, each movement, spoke of patience and trust honed through weeks of quiet observation. Sunlight spilled across the enclosure, illuminating the golden fur of the lioness and her cubs, catching on slick muzzles and twitching whiskers. The cubs tumbled into each other repeatedly, claws sliding in the damp soil, tiny roars mingling with the soft purrs of their mother. The scent of wet earth and straw filled the air, mingling with the faint metallic tang of care and medicine from the humans' past interventions. Hours passed in gentle exploration. The lioness followed, a shadow of guidance, occasionally correcting or lifting a stumbling cub with a careful nudge. Yet her presence felt less like a barrier and more like a safety net, allowing the young lions to discover strength, agility, and independence. The unusual cub, once fragile and uncertain, took its first confident steps, wobbling but persistent. The lioness's tail flicked once, a subtle gesture of approval. She lay back, chest rising and falling, eyes soft and proud, letting her offspring embrace the world in measured increments. A warm breeze stirred the enclosure, carrying the scent of wet soil and distant blooms. Birds called above, insects buzzed through the sun-dappled grass, and the distant low hum of other animals framed the quiet scene. The humans stepped back further, giving space, letting the lioness's family claim their moment. As the afternoon light softened into gold, the cubs gathered close to the lioness, tiny bodies pressed against her as if to store courage for future ventures. She lifted her head briefly, glancing toward the fence, and then returned to her vigilant watch, a silent guardian and teacher. The final moments of the day fell with poetic stillness. The cubs nestled close, exploring no more, the wind whispering through leaves, the sky a soft canvas of amber and pale blue. The humans departed quietly, carrying the weight of what they had witnessed, a fragile family, strengthened by trust, care, and instinct, taking its first steps into a life that was both wild and free. The lioness shifted slightly, chest rising in deep, contented breaths, her cubs resting around her. A soft, low purr vibrated through her, a lullaby of survival and love, sealing the chapter in quiet, enduring grace.